Let's do a recap of the experiment Does the Wavelength of Light Affect Photosynthesis? This is not something you can come into unprepared. It's not an easy thing to do. When you come into your first trial of an experiment, you need to have your head around the basic method that you've been given to measure whatever variables that you're measuring, and have an idea of the procedures you need to follow so that you can then trial them out and get used to them quite quickly, so that you can then start putting them into practice and getting some data. So essentially what you did yesterday is ended up being a trial. And all scientists do this before they do their actual experiments. They have to trial it out simply so they can practice the method. It's like doing a performance, really. If you can't get things set up and get them prepped and get them ready and get everything into order and organized so that you can start everything at the same time and get some good data out of it, then you're not going to be able to get any measurements whatsoever. Often in science, when you get into senior, the actual fine points of how to carry out the method is what holds a lot of people back until they learn it and trial it and then put it into action. So here's a few things. Number one, in future it is really important that everyone watch and read through the pre-given material on how to do the experiment so you come in prepared to get going and get ready. Number two, we really need to review the basics of experimental design. So I've put up my Year 8 videos on Connect on everything from variables and error to trials, tables and graphs. And I would like you to take down the notes on those videos, please. The other thing you need to do is think about what we're measuring and how we're going to do it. We were measuring how long it took for the photosynthesis to produce enough gas that the leaf discs floated. And a lot of people were unsure as to how to measure it. Well, it depends on what you want to measure. Everyone can measure this slightly differently, but as long as you measure it the same way each time, it doesn't matter. You could measure it how long it took for just one leaf disc to float and leave the rest on the bottom, because remember we had at least 5 in our container. But what if that leaf disc is one that's got more chloroplasts than everything else, and it's not a good measure of the average part of a leaf? If you just measure one, then you're really not getting the best measurement. If you have any of these leaves slightly damaged during the process of cutting them out and that, you may actually have damaged the cells so that they can't photosynthesize. So not all of them may float. So you don't want to have to wait until all of them float, because some of them may not. So what we said in the end was, take the first 5 leaves, because I said 5 to 10 in your little tubes, and wait for 5 of them to float, and time how long that takes. And then people said, okay, where do we start the timer? Well, again, that depends on you. As long as you start the time for all of these guys at the same time, that's the thing that matters, so that you can compare. So when you had all of your different colors here, you had to start the time all together. And with us on our first trial, we started it when we walked out into the sunlight, because that's when photosynthesis started. So we started it all together as soon as we exposed them to sunlight, and what you were to measure was how long it took for 5 of them in each tube to rise. And of course, that doesn't mean 5 across the whole thing here. Remember, each one of these are different groups. So you need to measure how long it takes for 5 to rise in here, 5 to rise in here, 5 to rise in here. If you don't measure each group separately, you're not actually thinking about this experiment very critically. Okay, you can't measure these whole things as a group. You're trying to compare the differences. So you had to find the amount of time it takes for 5 to rise in each tube. And if you have more leaf discs in those tubes, say up to 10, even better, because that means that if you've damaged any, then you still only have to wait for the first 5 to rise, and there's less chance that error is going to hold you back. The next thing you had to learn was how to put your data into a table to record your measurements, and I did give that to you yesterday. When you watch the videos on Connect, you'll realize that there is rules around how to set up your data tables, and you're actually going to be going over those rules so that you understand where we put our independent variables, where we put our dependent variables, and how we set up a table. And essentially it's always that your independent variable goes on the side, your dependent variable and all their trials go across the top, and then you do an average of those trials. Independent variables, your groups in this case, go down the side. So now let's get on to your homework. Essentially what I need you to start now is what every scientist does after a trial, and that's their evaluation. You've already done your independent and your dependent variables on your write-up. Down the bottom you had to do an evaluation of how you can improve this experiment, and you can certainly do that with what you had going yesterday with your trials. You need to think about how you could improve setting up, how you can improve getting your leaf discs and stuff all sorted and set up quickly so that you can start this experiment. If you wanted to change how you set this up by using test tubes or beakers instead of your syringes, I'm quite happy for you guys to try and do that, because standing them up in the test tube holders was not easy. But I'm going to see what you guys come up with that one. You could even go straight to looking at maybe just putting some blue tack down so everything stood up nice and neatly. You need to also talk about how you worked as a group and how you could have improved delegating jobs and getting stuff done on time. The last thing you need to talk about is how you could have timed it better and what you are going to do next time to make sure that you are timing all of the different groups and how long it takes 5 to rise. You need to come in with your head clearly around this prac so that you can get stuck into it next time. So by the time you come back, I'll expect to see not only the first part of your Google Doc filled out with your variables and your risk assessment. That's the other thing you need to do now that you've trialed it. What risks are there? Plus your evaluation. Put that in and set that up so that next time you actually do it better because you've learnt from this trial.